of Achenu Yisrael, our brothers and sisters in Israel, of the moral power of solidarity in a just cause, represented in that lone soldier, Yoel Kol HaKavod, as you recall, his great bravery, and that 20,000 Israelis came out in solidarity for that lone soldier. There can be no other more dramatic example of what a family state is. Just as my grandchildren, along with others in Israel, they all knew the names of Naftali, Gilad, and Yifrach. Last week, while Hamas rockets continued to target Israeli civilians, more than 80% of the Israeli civilian population is under targeted rocket attacks of Hamas. Israel nonetheless said that it would respond to, quote, in the Prime Minister's words, quiet with quiet. And it agreed to a unilateral ceasefire. Hamas's response was more rockets. Israel agreed to a humanitarian ceasefire. Hamas's response was to rain down more rockets. Then Hamas terrorists emerged from a terrorist tunnel, one of the many terrorist tunnels, in order, in their words, not mine, in order to kill and kidnap as many Israelis as possible. And so Israel was left no other choice but to enter Gaza. And so we meet today in the immediate aftermath, yet again, of the deaths of 25 Israeli soldiers, who, as one of the mothers put it so movingly today, they are our Iron Dome. They died defending the homeland. They did so that we may live. And as another put it, Hamas doesn't want only to kill us. It wants to force us to kill innocent Palestinians. Yet after 2,000 rockets have rained down in Israel in the last month alone, Western commentators uniformly, and I regret to say so even here in Canada, look at any newspaper, you'll still see that they refer to Hamas as militants. Not as a terrorist organization, as militants. Israel and Gaza are spoken of as being in a cycle of violence, as if there is a moral equivalent between a mass murderer and his intended victims. Let there be no mistake about it. Hamas is not just a terrorist organization, though that would be bad enough. It is a uniquely evil manifestation of genocidal anti-Semitism, as I said when we met 3 weeks ago. These are not words that I would ever use idly or easily. But there are no other words to describe, and this is not just a terrorist organization, a terrorist government that in its charter publicly is committed to and boasts of its commitment to the destruction of Israel and the killing of Jews wherever they may be. There is no moral equivalence between a genocidal terrorist entity like Hamas that intentionally targets civilians with the objective of killing as many as possible. And thank God for the Iron Dome that seeks to prevent it, and thank God for Tzahal, for the Israeli Defense Forces. No moral difference between that and a state like Israel, again, like Yoel Leon put it, which not only has the right, but the obligation to defend its citizens and seeks to do so by minimizing as maximally as possible the civilian casualties in Gaza. Clearly, the death of any innocent Israeli or Palestinian is a tragedy. But there is a fundamental moral and legal distinction between those who seek and advocate the killing of Jews wherever they may be, and those who are forced to defend themselves against these heinous acts, which tragically necessarily result in the deaths of innocents. For Hamas is the consummate war crimes terrorist government. I have to tell you that I don't know of any terrorist government in the world today. It's hard to find any terrorist government in the history of warfare that is alone engaged in such a panoply of war crimes and crimes against humanity, including first the deliberate targeting of civilian populations, a sustained war crime that has been going on now for close to 10 years and before. The designation, or rather the particular using and abusing of Palestinian civilians as human shields, indeed forcing them to act as human shields, a despicable war crime carried out against one's own citizens. Third, launching terrorist attacks from civilian enclaves, using a civilian structure as a gigantic human shield. Yet another despicable war crime. The crime of perfidy in international law, misappropriating and misrepresenting international humanitarian symbols as transporting terrorists in an ambulance or storing weapons in a UN school, and one can go on. Targeting and abducting Israeli children and boasting about it. Recruiting their own Palestinian children to engage in terrorist acts. A horrific and despicable war crime. Acting as a terrorist government that carries out war crimes against its own people. And finally, inciting to and calling for the destruction of Israel and the killing of Jews, more than only anchoring that in their charter, boasting about doing it again and again. Let there be no mistake about it. Each and all of the above are not just war crimes, though that would be horrific enough. But in their persistence, their pervasiveness, their perniciousness, they amount to what an international law calls crimes against humanity, the ultimate in war crimes. And let us not forget it. These crimes against humanity are being committed day after day. And we meet when the United Nations Council on Human Rights is scheduled to meet in 2 days, not to condemn Hamas's war crimes and crimes against humanity, but in the draft resolution, as I read it today, to condemn Israel for its war crimes and crimes against humanity, against Palestinian civilians. A more Orwellian inversion of law and morality one cannot find. And so I close with the same words with which we closed the last time we got together, but which still remains with me powerfully from my last visit to Israel, and which is being reinforced now with my daughter and son-in-law and my grandchildren arriving Erev Shabbat here to be with us here in Montreal. A trip that was pre-planned. Because I can tell you, knowing them, they're always on the front lines. But what I retained from my visit there, what I retained from our discussions in our family, is the power of solidarity in a just cause. The power of Israel as a family state. The power of Israel and the diaspora when joined together in common cause. And if you ask what is it that we can do here, then I would ask each and every one of you, sometime in the next week, the next month, I don't want to say in the next day, if each and every one of you were to sensitize 10 non-Jews to the justice of Israel's case and cause. And when I say this, if you say, I'm not sure I know 10 non-Jews, then that's part of the problem. We are talking only or too much to ourselves. And if you say, I know 10 non-Jews, but I'm not sure I can make the case that that's an even greater part of the problem. Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. We have to learn our case so that we can thereby affirm the justice of our cause. The power of the morality, of the commitment, of the IDF, the power of a people that celebrates life and not death. The power of the IDF that is the most moral army anywhere in the world today. And as I said, if you want to appreciate